All right. Well, good afternoon. Today's podcast here on the Environmental Transformation Podcast, we're introducing Whit Fosburgh. Whit's the CEO of the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Whit, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have this interview today. So I want to give the listeners a little background on you while we're here. So prior to coming to the TCRP, that's the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, back in 2010, Whit spent 15 years as the Trout Unlimited, or with Trout Unlimited, playing a crucial role in the organization's evolution into the conservation powerhouse it is. And additionally, he served as fisheries director for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and was the chief environment and energy staff member for Senator Tom Daschle, and was also a wildlife specialist for the National Audubon Society. And in 2015, he was honored as the Conservation Partner of the Year by the Bass Pro Shops. Whit, you have a nice career background here so far. I'm sure there's a little more there to talk about, but congrats. That's great.
Well, listen, I managed to figure out a way to get paid to do things I love. So
I know that feeling. The best job I have to admit I ever had, I used to work for the state of Indiana in the environmental agency, and we sampled the waters of the state. That was my first job out of college. And so all I did is I went through all the watersheds in Indiana, and we took water quality samples, and we were, evaluating non-point source runoff and point source inputs from the MPDS dischargers, sewage treatment plants and things like that. And it was just awesome job. And we got to do a little fishing, on the side. Yeah. So you couldn't beat it. Get a good pair of waders on, and we'd have a great time. As best job I ever had. But then I had a family. I had to get a little more pay. So I had to move on. Anyways, Whit, thank you for joining. And, the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, what a awesome name for this partnership. Give me a little background and let the listeners know, what's the mission of the TRCP and how did you get your name?
So the organization was created in 2002 by a guy named Jim Range. And Jim at that time was Howard Baker's chief counsel. Mm-hmm. And Baker was majority leader of the Senate, Republican from Tennessee, during the Reagan years. Mm-hmm. And, both Jim Range and Howard Baker were from Johnson City, Tennessee, good old boys, love to hunt and fish, sort of mm-hmm. old school Republican conservationists. Jim had been involved as a Senate staffer in writing a lot of the seminal environmental laws in the country today, from Endangered Species Act to the Clean Water Act. And, after the 90s, really during the 90s, he became more and more concerned that he saw that sensible center that the sportsmen's community had always represented sort of being vacated. Uh-huh. You had the environmental community moving further left and becoming more aligned with the Democratic Party. You had the gun community moving further right, becoming more aligned with the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And he felt that there was a big gap in the middle that mm-hmm. our community had always occupied, going back to Teddy Roosevelt's time.
Sure,
and it was really the sportsmen that Roosevelt first and foremost among them, that created in 1887 the Boone and Crockett Club, that was the first of what we consider the modern conservation groups, mm-hmm. that set out to not only stop the market hunting at that time and bring wildlife back, but also conserve habitat.
Right.
When Roosevelt was president, sets aside 230 million acres for all Americans to enjoy, not just for fish and wildlife, but also because he thought being out in nature and challenging himself made him the man that he'd become.
Right.
And he wanted all Americans to have the opportunity to do that. And then early environmental laws, and then back starting in the 1930s, the sportsmen's community, and I say sportsmen, I mean sportsmen and women, but at that time it was almost all sportsmen, mm-hmm. Decided to tax themselves during the Depression by adding an excise tax that would essentially go to the federal government, then go back out to states for fish and wildlife conservation. They passed the Duck Stamp Act back at that same time for all waterfowl hunters to pay extra into a fund that would protect habitat. And, that sort of continued until really the 50s and 60s is where you started to see the proliferation of species groups. Ducks Unlimited was created in the 1930s, and then Trout Unlimited in the 50s. elk foundations, Pheasants Forever, Mule Deer Foundation. I mean, you name it. If there is a critter out there, people like to hunt and fish, there's a group or two.
Those otters, they're out there.
Well, yeah, I haven't
Those
seen
beavers.
Otters Unlimited. That's not a big, game animal. Yeah. But, basically, and those groups did amazing work. Think about, the fact that white-tailed deer were rare in this country in the early 1900s, and they're everywhere today. Turkeys, were on the verge of going extinct at one point, and thanks to the work of the Wild Turkey Federation, we have turkeys, throughout their native range and beyond. Right. Ducks there were a lot of folks that thought ducks were going to go extinct back in the 1930s, as you had the Dust Bowl and elimination of habitat and water pollution. And Ducks Unlimited really reversed that trend, and we have great waterfowl populations today. Now, the downside of all that was taking the collective eye off of the federal policy that really underlay everything. So these groups that do fantastic work, restoring a wetland or fixing up a headwater stream like a Trout Unlimited, or talking to farmers and getting some land put into conservation. But collectively, we ceased being a voice or an active voice in Washington, D.C. So Jim Range decided to create an organization that brought all those groups that really cared about conservation together to speak on a common voice on issues that were too big for any one group. Right. Big things like agriculture policy, energy policy, public lands policy, conservation funding,
water quality.
And then going back to the name, when the organization was created, we actually, back in 2002, Jim went to Ted Roosevelt IV and explained what he wanted to do. And Ted, to his credit, embraced it, thought this was something that the family would love. And so the organization was birthed at that time.
Ah, that's amazing. That is just so amazing. And I've been to, like the Teddy Roosevelt National Park out there, and in South Dakota, I believe, in North Dakota, and just gorgeous out there. The whole park systems that he was involved with helping establish that. I love his passion, and for you guys to be able to use his, initial ideas for conservation into this, bipartisan group that's advocating for environmental conservation. It's awesome. I love it. Well, why is it so important for advocacy groups like the TRCP and others to get involved in this nonpartisan way to promote the protection of, the national and state public lands for hunting and fishing enthusiasts? Why is this so important?
Well, you just think that, listen, hunting and fishing is not a partisan issue. I mean, Democrats hunt and fish, Republicans hunt and fish. It's never been a partisan issue. Environmental conservation, the same way. I mean, Richard Nixon, when he created the EPA back in the late 60s, early 70s, didn't do it because he was a conservation nut. He realized it was something that could bring the country together at a time of race riots, the Vietnam War, burgeoning Watergate scandal. And it was something that all Americans basically could agree on at that time. And I think that remains true today. And what we don't want to do is have these issues taken over by any one political party or interest group, because you may score some short-term wins that way. But we've seen that administrations can change every 4 years, and policies can dramatically swing back the other way. Right. And what we want to do is advocate that sensible center that is strong and true, regardless of whether you have a Republican or Democratic administration in place.
Oh, that's great. Well, that makes a lot of sense because, like you said, the winds of change are occurring quite often, and the pulse of the public and interest there is changing. Well, how does the TRCP encourage Congress to allocate funding to support land and water conservation initiatives? I mean, what's involved with that? I mean, got to imagine.
That's really a two-part question. I mean, first part, I'm going to go to the second half of that, which is the funding, which is sort of that black box in Washington. Really, nobody understands the budgeting and appropriations process. And God knows, our members, the 40 million plus folks out there that like to hunt and fish. The last thing they really want to do is to engage in the sausage macing in Washington on a particular appropriations bill. But if you're going to be successful, you've got to do that, because that is the backbone of everything from the Farm Bill and private land conservation to environmental enforcement through the EPA, as you know from your time in Indiana, to how our public lands are run. And if you don't have funding to do that, you go back to the David Stockman days during the 80s and the attempts to basically, make government smaller and smaller by starving it to the point where, quote, you could drown it in the bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
And, that may make a good soundbite, but it's really lousy policy, particularly for the 640 million acres of public lands and for clean water and clean air and all those other things. So the way
Mm-hmm.
we do it is we have 61 different organizations under our broad umbrella, ranging from the usual suspects, the Ducks Unlimited, the Trout Unlimited, but also trade associations, American Sport Fishing Association, National Marine Manufacturers. AFL-CIO is a partner because 70% of their 12 million members hunt and fish. You have the land trust community because wildlife and hunting and fishing need land.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very much the broad tent, and our role is severalfold. I mean, bunch of those groups, in fact, the majority of the groups that are our partners, don't have a DC presence, so we effectively act as that. So
Okay.
we will develop policy positions. We'll circulate them among the broader group. We'll try to
Mm-hmm.
engage, tell folks to engage. We'll let them know if you're in Utah, who you want to contact your congressional delegation to weigh in on this particular issue and how to do it. And we'll do a lot of the follow up, and we'll do a lot of the actual physical lobbying in person. But we'll
Mm-hmm.
also organize fly-ins for folks to come in. We'll do communications campaigns that are national in scope or very local, depending on what we're trying to influence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's traditional inside the Beltway advocacy, but it's done not just by us, but by 61 very authentic groups out there, plus a cadre of businesses that have joined us, and individual sportsmen, local rod and gun clubs. It's just the average Joe. A lot of it is just weighing in because these are bread and butter issues.
Wow. So, it sounds like there's a lot of tracking of events in Congress of what's going on and what bills getting passed, and a lot of patience that's probably has to be, you know, played here to really keep track of this and understand the long game, so to speak, when things are going to happen, and be able to communicate that out to the interested parties.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of that and sort of explaining how it works and keeping folks engaged. We also have to make sure we're not practicing scorched earth because you got to come back again. You may lose every now and then, but you don't want to, forego the option of coming back and working with those same folks who may have voted against you on something that will vote with you on the next one. So you
Sure.
keep it professional, you keep it science-based, you stick to the
Hmm.
facts, you don't do personal attacks,
Right.
which is a little bit unusual in this day and age. But I think that it's the place where our community wants to be because honestly, it doesn't want to be the bomb throwers in the corner. It wants to be that sensible voice.
Yeah, right. You want to help, improve the environment. You want to provide the hunters and the sports fishermen and women, the ability to enjoy the great outdoors, and um, you don't want that to be impeded, and you need support from the Congress and these groups. So that's great. Um, so I was reading there has been some recent significant, should I say, laws or acts that's been recently approved in Congress. I think that a lot of it's been the hard legwork of what your organization's been doing, but maybe you could talk about the new Great American Outdoors Act, and President Trump signed that into law back in August of this year.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of goes to the point when Washington truly is broken in a lot of ways, and these are the one set of issues that Republicans, Democrats can seem to agree on.
It's
So we've actually had a
bipartisan
pretty good year in
efforts.
Congress.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the Great American Outdoors Act, which is something a lot of us have been trying to get done for decades. So
Uh-huh.
it does two things. I mean, one, it permanently funds and fully funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And
Okay.
second, it creates almost a $10 billion trust fund to tackle the maintenance backlog on our public lands. So I'll talk with
Oh,
you about each of those separately.
yeah. Let's
The
do that.
Water Conservation Fund was created in 1965 by Congress as a compromise. At that time, oil and gas companies were interested in drilling on the outer continental shelf,
Hmm.
and a lot of folks didn't want them to. So the compromise was that, okay, we're going to open up the outer continental shelf to oil and gas development, but the oil and gas industry is going to pay $900 million every year into a fund for land and water conservation.
Wow.
And basically, that's broken up into about half of that goes to local parks. So if you have a local playground, soccer fields, baseball diamonds, basketball courts, that's probably been paid for in part by a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. And the other half goes to protect important areas that maybe a timber company is selling its holdings, is getting out of the business. And the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we purchase those to add to a national forest or a state forest or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
It may do negotiations with a private landowner for a permanent conservation easement, so that we
Mm-hmm.
have working lands in perpetuity, but we know that's not going to be developed with condos. So
Mm-hmm.
the problem with the Land and Water Conservation Fund, since it was created only one time in those 55 years, was it fully funded by Congress. The rest
Oh,
of the
okay.
time, Congress would rate it for other things, unrelated.
I
So
see.
finally, we were able to get it off budget. And so the $900 million that goes in every year from the industry now is going to go out for its intended purpose, which is, parks and recreation and protecting wild places.
Wow,
So,
that's gonna be some interesting improvements over the next 5 to 10 years, I gotta imagine,
yeah, I mean, the
with this
average conversation
dedicated.
funding recently has been about that $400 million range. So we're
Mhm,
more than doubling it.
mhm,
And God knows we're not making more open space. It seems to be
right,
getting gobbled up all the time. So we need that money and we need it soon. And, we also, I think the pandemic has showed, we want to support people getting outside. And
right,
that may be a local basketball court or a baseball diamond, or it may be, a new, park or state park, federal park, maybe new access areas. So
trails improvements, all
yeah,
kinds
it
of
could
stuff,
be.
right?
It could be all over the place. So
Mhm,
anyway, that was one part of the Great American Outdoors Act. The second part was this trust fund to deal with the maintenance backlog on our public lands. It is estimated that we have about a 20 billion with a B dollar maintenance backlog on our national parks, refuges,
oh,
national forests, and BLM lands. And that
mm,
may manifest itself in a dilapidated visitor center or a campground that's closed because this is such disrepair, or
mhm,
trails that are all rutted out, or a road that is now impassable on a national forest because it has not been maintained. So
mm.
it could be a boat ramp someplace that is in disrepair. So this can be used to address all those maintenance backlogs we spent down over 5 years. And not only is it good for our parks and forests and refuges, but it's also a way to get people outside and get them back to work. And these
Yeah.
are jobs that are doing all this. They're not going to get exported overseas. They're going to be American jobs with Americans doing the work at a time when a lot of folks need to get outside again and get to work.
That's kinda like the old civilian corps, type concept here, right? And then didn't Teddy Roosevelt institute that, I believe,
That was
in some of those
actually
parks?
Franklin Roosevelt.
Oh,
During the
Franklin Roosevelt, I'm sorry,
National
you're right. It
Security.
was part of the family though, but
Yeah. So no, it's the same sort of concept. I mean, it's not
right.
called that, but the idea is, these are all activities that are going to spur economic development, both Land and Water Conservation Fund as well as the maintenance backlog, here in the United States.
Wow, that's great. So, I gotta imagine there was a lot of, like, celebration there with that.
Oh yeah. So then, in a year that has not had a lot to celebrate, we celebrated heartily on that one. And it was great because everybody took credit. I mean, Democrats have been pushing for this and a bunch of Republicans for years. Trump took credit. We wanted everybody to take credit for this.
Everybody
So
takes credit. Yeah, we're all benefiting from this,
absolutely. This is
our
something
whole
we all should
country.
be proud of.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's I mean, that's gotta be super rewarding and exciting to see that come to, fruition, and with all the hard work, with all the organizations, like, I mean, my goodness, that's pretty amazing. Well, and so that was a pretty monumental, you know, thing that happened with this new law getting, refunded and everything. But then really just like on the heels of that, just recently, there was another wildlife conservation type act. It's called the Great American Outdoors Act. No, that's I'm sorry. It's called the American Conservation Enhancement Act. So what is that one about?
Well, if you think of the Great American Outdoors Act as the grand slam home run, I think the American Conservation Enhancement Act is more like bunt singles and maybe a double every now and then. It's small,
Okay.
but it's still really important. It was
Nice victory.
basically an omnibus of several different bills. It
Okay.
reauthorized the North American Wetland Conservation Act at about
Okay.
60 million a year. That has been purchasing wetlands and protecting wetlands around the country for years,
Hmm.
and a really successful program that leverages a bunch of private dollars from groups like Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl.
Hmm.
It basically created the National Fish Habitat Partnership Act, which essentially is the North American Wetlands Conservation Act for fish. It
Okay.
funds local partnerships, uses federal seed funding, and then states and locals will match that money for stream restoration projects that restore fisheries habitat. It's
Oh, I like
something that's
that.
existed administratively for years, but had never been codified by Congress, and basically any president could have eliminated it.
Yeah,
Now
no,
it has
not
been codified by Congress and funded, or will be funded, and we hope it becomes as important as NAWCA has been for ducks.
And so will that be funded like on an annual basis based on the
We
law?
have to
Or
go to
how's
Congress every year and get them to kick in money for it.
okay.
So it's not been taken off budget, but that's fine. I think we can make a very strong case that these projects more than pay for themselves and leverage a lot of other money and volunteer labor at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Other provisions in the ACE Act, as we call it, included reauthorization of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which has been basically giving out grants for on-the-ground restoration projects since 1984 to the tune of over $6 billion now in terms of federal money matched by corporate money and state money. A great institution, but was created by Congress and needs that congressional authorization again. It created a task force of the federal agencies to deal with chronic wasting disease, which is essentially the deer equivalent of mad cow disease and is a real threat to hunting in this country.
Right.
So that was, another important part of it. So it really creates, I think some more federal initiative to get on top of that problem before it spreads any further than it is. It's currently in 26 different states around this country. It is 100% fatal to deer. It has not jumped the species barrier to humans right now, but if it did, it would be very bad news. But then you can go ahead and ask about that, or I can go to the other two key.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because, I just started getting into that, just learning about it really. And because I started researching the website and I have some hunting friends. I mean, I live in rural Indiana, northwestern Indiana or central Indiana, and there's a ton of hunting around here. Great white-tailed deer hunting. And I hadn't heard this before. And, so how did this disease get started? I mean, what's the impact of to the population?
Nobody really knows exactly how it started. Basically, it's a genetic mutation, a malformed protein in the brain. And it's a prion disease like mad cow disease, like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, like scrapie in sheep. What we do know is that where it was spread was largely through the captive deer industry. And there is a captive deer industry out there that raises some deer for venison, for restaurants, for the table, but most of it is and I'm going to use air quotes on this, for hunting experiences where people can go in without spending the time to really hunt and shoot a large animal they can put on their wall. And these captive facilities will ship animals all over the place. And anytime you have a lot of animals in close proximity, it is an incubator for disease. And sure enough, as these animals get swapped around the country, as you spread genetic material, you're also spreading disease. And that has been the primary way we think that it's gone from a single state, Colorado, to 26 states and spreading.
Wow.
And it's a fundamental threat to deer hunting, and 80% of the hunting industry in this country is deer hunting, and that includes elk and mule deer, but mostly whitetails. And and we're really seeing the growth right now is that sort of the new hunter is a person who largely is not doing it because of the size of an animal on the wall. It's doing it for the experience, for getting out there, for the food, locally sourced, non-GMO, high protein, lean meat.
Right.
And, if we all of a sudden scare people off that it's not safe to eat venison, then that is not only a problem for deer hunting, it's a problem for conservation, given how much money hunters pay through excise taxes and licenses and fees and tags in conservation.
Well, so is there any like medical scientific research going on to how to maybe, come up with a vaccine for this type of disease situation?
Because it's a prion disease, it's not living. And again, I'm not a doctor, so I don't really explain this very well. So there's not going to be a vaccine for it.
Okay.
What we can do is, sort of prevent it spread and just hope it doesn't jump to humans. And there are various techniques that we've learned, the state agencies have learned to keep it at background levels. If you find it in an area, you go in and you kill a bunch of deer, and you can get hunters to help you with that. And if you have low numbers, the disease can, basically just fade out over time because there's just not enough, density in the population to keep it spreading.
I mean, is it something that's you can tell by looking at the deer that they've got the disease? I
over
mean,
time,
it looks sickly or something, or what?
Over time, it will appear emaciated. You'll see the ribs hanging out. It will, its head will be slung down. It will be drooling.
Okay.
And the problem is that as they sort of get weaker, then typically they're easier to kill, and either by a predator or by a hunter. And often, they're done so before they're showing clinical signs,
Gotcha.
like the staggering around with the ribs exposed.
So is there danger, with an unsuspecting hunter if they were to kill a deer that had it? I mean, could they get infected by eating the meat? Do you know?
Potentially, I mean, the CDC recommends not eating meat from infected deer. Again, there's never been a case. We know tons of hunters have eaten infected deer just given the fact of where the disease is. It hasn't. We don't know that it's popped up in anybody yet. But why do we want to take that risk? I mean,
Right.
let's get on top of it now. Let's stop spreading deer all over the place. If there was an
Mhm.
issue in captive facilities, let's deal with it there and not let it get into the wild. And if there are things that the hunters can do and the wildlife agencies, like reducing deer densities, let's do it.
Right, right. Well, now I was reading on the website the other day, and there was this concern that some of the funding that's going towards, supporting this disease is actually it's going to these like confined, deer facilities, and that's where the problem is, instead of really helping out the other areas in the
Yeah,
wild.
it's
So
been frustrating. I mean, I think you've described it pretty well. I mean, for example, we got $5 million last year to go out to states for surveillance and testing on CWD.
yeah,
That Department of Agriculture, unbeknownst to us, siphoned off $1.5 million, sent it to deer farms for quote indemnification. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. What that means is that if a CWD pops up in a deer farm someplace, the deer farm is going to be required to basically kill everything.
kill everything. Right. Yeah.
And then they get compensated for that loss, which we're supportive of, because the last thing we want them to do is not deal with their problem. The problem we see is there's already a separate fund of money for that in the Department of
Ah,
Agriculture, and they
I
shouldn't be
see.
rating the money that's supposed to go out to the states.
Right.
So, we're still angry about that. I think the time is coming where we're going to need to have a sort of comprehensive legislation done by Congress that funds aggressively and surveillance and testing, funds the research more aggressively, but
Hmm.
then also sort of puts limits on the movement of deer until we can get our house in order in terms of these facilities.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, that's these are great topics to be on top of. Somebody's got to pay attention to this, and so I'm glad as the TRCP and other, organizations, looking after this to help raise these issues, because most hunters, the average Joe, so to speak, he may not really be tuned into this, but maybe he is, but I mean, like I said, it was something new I just recently learned. So we'll talk a little bit about the big issues that the TRCP are supporting and educating with the public to improve fish and wildlife habitat.
Well, I mean, we just talked about some of them, those bills that passed, and the ACE Act, the America's Conservation Enhancement Act, had a couple other key provisions too. One which is reauthorizing the Great Lakes program and the Chesapeake Bay program, which have been really successful programs in getting those water bodies in better shape today than they used to be. But
Hmm.
in terms of general, I'd say there are a few different things. I mean, one, we're always going to have to work on balancing development and conservation.
Hmm.
And you look at our federal lands today, and the Trump administration has been very active, and they put out early on the mantra of energy dominance, meaning that energy development would take precedence over any other use on public lands. Now
Hmm.
they've toned that down a good bit, particularly since David Bernhardt's been the Secretary of the Interior. But
Hmm.
still, there's always a battle as to where you do development and where you don't do development and how you do it.
Right.
And for example, the National Forest System has 193 million acres. Every acre of there is divided up into some forest plan, and the public has an opportunity to comment on those plans. Same thing with the Bureau of Land Management, which has 240 million acres, again, developed in more than 100 regional resource management plans. And we have to engage in those to basically weigh in on the behalf of the sportsmen. We have to
Hmm.
make sure that the agencies are well funded to do their jobs. I mean, it's a lot of people love to hate the federal government, but the Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, they generally do a really good job, and there's not a lot of fat in those budgets. And I think that we need to invest in those because that's the heart of the $778 billion outdoor recreation economy in this country. And if we're not investing in that and proper management and good management and maintained facilities, then we're not taking full advantage of that that economic giant that outdoor recreation is.
Right.
I would say climate is going to be another huge one. I mean,
Right.
we organized about 41 of our various members and released a statement to Congress urging them to engage in climate. Yes, to reduce emissions, but also to really invest in sequestration and adaptation. I mean, the scientists estimate that somewhere around 20% of the solution is going to be from sequestering carbon in lands and waters. And that's where our community is really good at restoring wetlands, better
Right.
managing forests, reforestation, getting more lands into conservation and ag country. But really working with private landowners to make sure they're a part of the solution too. Incentivize farmers for improving soil health, for
Sure.
sequestering carbon. I mean, the
Best
farming
management
community,
practices.
incredibly clever and smart, and knows that you ask them to do something, you give them the resources to do it, they'll be able to do it.
Yeah, you're touching on the farmer stuff, way back in, I want to say, early 2000s. I was involved with the conservation, uh, um, uh, what is it, the CRP program for,
Conservation Reserve Program.
uh, yeah. So we were hired, GHT was hired to go out and help sign up farmers, to put their lands in, certain, grasses and things like that, and to be a part of the CRP program. I thought that was a pretty eye-opening experience, because it just really showed you that habitat conservation and best management practices that they were promoting, that the farmers were voluntarily doing, taking their land out of production, but make it, having a benefit to, the environment. I think it was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect example. And from those early days of CRP, when we had about 37 million acres enrolled in the program, we're
Hmm.
down to under 22 million acres today. And in the meantime, we're just giving farmers, bailout checks because of trade wars and things like that. And I would love to see us, actually ask the farmers to do something for the money and to help, solve problems like, fish and wildlife habitat, clean water, which they can
Hmm.
do, but we're
Yeah.
not asking them to right now. And the programs we know work, like CRP, are really not being implemented the way they should be.
Yeah. Well, that's more education, and that's really what we need to focus there on. So, well, talk about the proposed changes in the Forest Service's leasing rule and how that could affect hunting and fishing, because that seemed to be kind of
Yeah, so
something
that's
new
we're
on the
starting to
horizon.
get a little bit into the weeds of federal policy, but the Forest Service administers about 193 million acres around the country, mostly
Hmm.
national forests, but some national grasslands.
Hmm.
And but in a quirk of government history, they don't control the subsurface mineral rights on those lands. The Bureau of
Sure.
Land Management does.
Right.
And
Okay.
but in the past, before the BLM could go ahead and lease out national forests for oil and gas development, for example, they would
Hmm.
have to get the Forest Service to concur to that, to approve it. And the
Gotcha.
Forest Service knows their own lands and where ecologically sensitive, where the great hunting and fish areas, things like that, far better than BLM does.
Right.
So that and that has protected a bunch of areas that have been proposed for leasing, from actually being leased because like the Forest Service said, hold on now, let's not do it there. Not only is there a low mineral potential, but this is a critical area for mule
Yeah.
deer.
Pristine area for our,
Yeah,
for
exactly.
wildlife. Right.
So, but because that was perceived as a impediment to energy development, the administration has proposed eliminating that role of the Forest Service to concur or approve any development on Forest Service land. So it'd just be a
Mm,
BLM decision.
I
Now,
see.
the comment period is open on that until November 2nd. Obviously, we're commenting on it. We're trying to get a bunch of our partners to comment on it because we just don't think it makes any sense. I
So
mean,
we basically, the TRCP's position is we want the Forest Service to still have a say in that. Is that what you're saying?
absolutely. It's their
Yeah,
land. They
absolutely.
know it better than BLM does. They know where the
Right.
important areas are. And, we have, listen, there may be certain areas in the forest system that are absolutely appropriate for energy development. Fine.
Sure. Right.
But others, may not be. And we want to have that safeguard in place.
Makes sense
So
to
we're not
me. I mean,
filing lawsuits,
that's
to
just
try to block something.
that's just being smart, conservationists basically, and environmental protection. I mean, really is what that's all about. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of on the horizon, and that bill is being it's on open for public comment now.
Yeah, it's not a bill, it's a proposed rule from the administration that is
Oh,
out
okay, I
for
see.
comment right now. It is comment period ends on November 2nd, so the day before the election.
Hmm.
So we'll be doing comments. We'll be doing press on it. So if folks want to learn more about it, they can go to trcp.org and find out what we say about it.
Sure, absolutely. No, I like that. Well, so we've been talking about a lot of these organizations that you kind of represent as a kind of you're kind of like the umbrella. They all funnel up under you a little bit. I mean, I think they do their own things individually as well, but you're kind of like herding the cats, so to speak, to have that one voice, right? So, talk a little bit about how that relationship works between your organizations and say, Ducks Unlimited and Isaac Walton League and those types of people.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we, unless they want us to, we don't speak for them. We're simply trying to help organize them. We have our own voice. We have about 110,000 individual members, at TRCP ourselves.
Right.
So, we speak for ourselves, and there are times when we just send something in on our letterhead and don't speak for the rest of the community. There are other
Sure.
times that there will be a lot of different groups signed on. But we also, sort of agree as you become a partner of ours, we agree to disagree. There will be some
Mhm.
times when Ducks Unlimited and TRCP will have different positions on issues, and that's fine. And we'll
Sure.
just park that at the door and not worry about that. We're just going to work together on what we all agree on, and that's 95% of everything.
Sure.
And so it's just you have to be sensitive. It's like any sort of partnership. And last thing we want to do is to tell other people how to do their business. We want to
Right.
make a case why we think it's good business to do this, but we definitely want to be respectful for what they do. And honestly, if we're doing our job, then they're a strong organization at the end of the day because we've helped raise the sea for all the ships.
I like it. I like it. That's great. So they don't really view you guys as a threat or anything like that. They truly see you as a partner to help, advocate for a common purpose.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, I mean, obviously, every nonprofit is territorial. It's got to do its own fundraising. It has very
Mhm.
jealous of its own members. It's jealous of its reputation. So it can be, a tense discussion sometimes, but, we try to bend over backwards to make sure that we're being really responsive to our members because without them, we're nothing.
Right, right, right. Well, so how important is individual and corporate membership to the TRCP?
Well, it's important in two regards. I mean, one, if something is happening really fast on the Hill or in administration, and we literally have hours to weigh in on it, then by having our individual membership, the 110,000 folks that have signed up organically as supporters or donors of ours, we
Mhm.
can mobilize those folks in seconds, and
Mhm.
that's important. We don't have to sort of wait to mobilize our partners and have them go through whatever process they may need to engage in issues. So it allows us to be much more nimble.
Mhm.
Second, on the corporate side, we have created a corporate council that is about 25 different companies that range from Coca-Cola and Shell to Bass Pro Shops and Orvis. So very much a big tent, and we've just we try to pick companies in different market sectors we feel are leaders
Mhm.
and work with them because we are convinced they care about the environment and care about conservation. They're going to contribute in their own way. They may give us money. They may push out an issue that is happening and engage their members to weigh in on it.
Mhm.
They may quietly call a senator or the White House on behalf of some of our issues. So that how they engage is varies. We also have other relationships with more than 100 different companies that may donate product to our banquet. They may sort of engage and support us in one way or another. And I think that all of that just makes us stronger. Again,
Sure. Yeah.
we're not going to tell them to do anything, but if they want to engage, we're going to give them the information and show them, just what the facts are and how they can make a difference.
That's great. Well, I mean, some of those corporate sponsors are clients of ours that I work with as well, and it's great to see that they're investing in an organization like the TRCP because I couldn't think of a better way to help raise their corporate profile. To make a statement of that they're in support of environmental legislation and conservation practices, because some of these guys are major companies that, sometimes to get a bad rap. So it's great to see that. I really think that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you look at the last few years. I mean, it's really been sort of on things like climate, for example. It's really been the private sector that's been leading. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Shell is a great example. I mean, they were strongly opposed to the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Agreement. They
Mm-hmm.
have incentive compensations for all their senior people based on achieving climate goals. They reckon there's a whole energy transition is
Yeah,
fundamental.
they are doing it now. They're
So,
transitioning.
I've been accused of being doing greenwashing by having them as a partner, but that goes to the territory. I just think that corporate America is going to have to be a part of the solutions. Yeah, they're going to be bad actors that are going to oppose doing anything good. We're just not going to work with them. But
Right.
I'm happy to work with the companies that want to do the right thing.
Well, that's right. I mean, and that's great to hear, especially somebody like Shell. I love to hear that. Well, so talk about how the TRCP is organized. I mean, do you have representatives in local regions, or how are you guys organized to actually, mobilize and connect with your partners and get the message out? How do you do that?
So, we have two advisory boards. That's to be our policy council, which is made up of those 61, nonprofits. And we have a corporate council with those 25, sort of core companies that, and those are both advisory bodies to the board and to the staff.
Hmm.
And then we have about 34 staffers around the country. About a dozen of them are in DC. That's where the headquarters are. This is where the lobbying is, where the main communications efforts come from. Fundraising is here. This is where I sit.
Hmm.
But most of the folks that are out beyond are organizers. So they're the folks that are in Colorado, in Nevada, in Montana, in Oregon, the people that are out there mobilizing local rod and gun clubs, local businesses, talking to Oregon representatives and Oregon senators
Hmm.
to engage on these federal issues that we care about. So it is a fairly diverse group. We were fortunate as we went into COVID that we had just invested in making sure the entire staff was on laptops, and we upgraded our entire IT system. And given the fact that majority of the staff's already working remotely, it was fairly seamless for us.
Hmm.
But those folks are all out there, and everything that we do is divided into one of 5 conservation areas, and that's public lands, private lands, water, conservation funding, and climate. And then the fifth one is marine fisheries.
Okay.
So, each of those areas has got a senior staff person that runs it, and then working groups underneath it. And those working groups are where the various partners, where we have real expertise, they get together, and our staffers tend to facilitate meetings, facilitate position statements, press releases, things like that. So
Sure.
there is a lot of herding cats, but it's working. So
That's
knock on
great.
wood.
No, that's awesome. I really like that. Okay, so uh, how does the TRCP address the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic with its members? How are you guys dealing with that? Because I'm sure that's gonna be a topic that you guys got to bring up, talk
Oh,
about.
absolutely. So I mean, there are a couple of different ways. We have been helping with about 5 of our partner organizations spearhead a hashtag responsible recreation that was early on when folks were getting outside, was just promoting it, doing it smart, because the last thing you
Mhm.
want to do is have a state open up and then a bunch of knuckleheads jump into a party boat and they all get COVID, and then the state
Mhm.
closes boating back up again. And
Mhm.
so it's just a message that, get outside, but be smart about it.
Be
Maintain your social
responsible.
distancing, pick
Right.
up after you leave. Don't leave a mess in a campground that somebody else is going to have to clean up. Just take the common sense approach to be responsible when we recreate. So that's been part of it. We've also been doing is, and you'll see some of our ads on social media, really, promoting something we're calling conservation works. And that is investing in conservation as a way to put Americans back to work. And that
Mhm.
may be what we talked about with the maintenance backlog on our public lands,
Yeah.
but there are a bunch of other things too that we can do that get people outside, put them back to work, that are really important for our environment too. So
Well,
really,
yeah.
those I think are the main things: responsible recreation and the conservation works for America, to getting jobs through environmental restoration and protection.
So I'm thinking if I'm a young professional or I'm somebody maybe in college and, active enthusiast that really enjoys the outdoors, grew up with their mom and dad doing stuff like that. And they say, I'd like to kind of get involved with this. Do you guys do internships?
We do. We have a few interns every year. A little tough right now, but we've actually managed to do a couple of remote internships during COVID. So what we can do is, we can not only, we'll take folks in and listen, they can become interns, but they can also just, get engaged with our field staff someplace and be an advocate. Take it upon yourself to, your little, fishing club that you may be a member of, get them engaged on an issue that's important in your state. They may have never thought about that, but if you're in a college fishing club, start, add conservation to the agenda, invite one of our staffers over to give a talk to your group one night, get engaged. I mean, ultimately it's up to the people to maintain the system that we have today that we're so proud of. And, that means we just can't be complacent. We have to get up and do something about it. So there's that. What we also can do is we tend to be a gateway for our broader community. So, if your real passion is, grassland conservation or CRP and pheasants, and you don't know where to start, come to us. We can connect you with the local folks at Pheasants Forever or Quail Forever or Turkey Federation or whatever the group may be that you're really passionate about. And they may have a lot more opportunities than we do because we're pretty darn small in the big scheme of things.
Sure. No, that's great. So somebody could, I guess, come and work and maybe work side by side by some of the folks that are going to lobby some senators about some new proposed law or act, right? I mean, that kind of would be very interesting, I would imagine.
Oh, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, this stuff, but I mean, I still am naive enough to believe in public service and government, and I just think we're at a little trough right now that we're going to get through this. But I just think it's this has worked for since the 1780s for the most part. It hasn't picked up along the way, but it is dependent upon citizen engagement. And I think most of the legislators that are out there in Congress and state government are truly altruistic. They could probably be making more money in the private sector, but they do this because they care. Yeah, there are exceptions to that, and we hear about them when they go to jail. But I think in general, I think that most people are doing this for the right reasons, and I think that it's up to us to engage and help those folks.
That would be good. That would be pretty fascinating for someone to kind of get exposure to that and maybe basically realize that there's a career opportunity in that once they graduate. I mean, I think that'd be kind of neat.
Hey, listen, worked for me, so
yeah. I mean, yeah, you're a perfect example of that. Hey, you're the CEO of the TRCP. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what's next for the TRCP in 2021?
Well, we're going to be dealing with new administration, whether it's Trump 2 or whether it's Biden. There's always a lot of change, and so I think we're in the process right now of whatever happens. And we did this in 2016. I mean, we were prepared, and I was surprised as anybody when the election happened. But that said, I mean, we were prepared to work with the Trump administration when they came in, and we started right away working on the transition plans. Then we'll do the same thing now. And we've got documents. We've gone to Biden. We'll go to Trump or have gone to Trump. Just saying what our priorities are. In the next administration, and we break it out into first 100 days, first year, first term. So I think that a lot of it is going to be sort of seizing the opportunities that always come in the first part of a new administration, and given our track record of the last couple of years here, I'm pretty bullish that we're going to be successful regardless of what happens.
Oh, that's great. I mean, there has been a lot of really good progress these past few years, and I think that's a testament to your organization and all the partners, and just obviously the congressmen and women who are supporting it. And I think that's really interesting that you really hone in or make a point to say this is nonpartisan, right? I mean, it's all completely a bipartisan effort to get everyone should be agreeing on conservation and environmental protection.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, a lot of times these issues are controversial. I mean, back when Theodore Roosevelt was doing his thing in the early 1900s, there were a lot of people that fought him tooth and nail, and those same interests are still out there.
Sure,
and they continue to fight us now. It is up to us, to basically make the case that what we're arguing for makes more sense than basically developing everything. Or rolling back all regulations. And listen, we've lost some things in this administration, and I've been pretty darn critical of the Trump administration from time to time. But there were times when I was critical of the Obama administration too. So, I mean, we just have to make sure that we're staying based on our positions, based on the science,
True, yeah, true to
and
yourself, right?
and just this is these issues are going to last a lot longer than whatever administration is next, and it's incumbent upon us to create durable conservation that survives the test of time.
The guardians of the conservation, practices and management of our public lands. I love it. I mean, I think you guys are doing a great job in this. So, Whit, I mean, this has been a great show. I'm super excited. I joined the TRCP just knowing this was coming up. I was like, I got to learn more about this group. This is fantastic.
Well, you got family, you got friends, right? Come on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, yeah. Well, I talked to one of my buddies who's a huge hunter, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to do this podcast. Have you heard of this group?" And he was like, "Oh man, I've been a member of those guys for 10 years. I love them." And so, I just didn't know anything about it. And anyways, I'm excited now that I've got some more information and I can talk and get more involved too. And no, this is good. So, hey, thanks for coming on the show today, because I think you're shining a light on some topics that a lot of people, maybe not know about, or understand how it works. Right. And you're kind of, bringing that, that voice of reason through the woods and the wilderness here to try to help, solve these problems, maintain some good public lands for everybody. And you, like you said, use the good science and what's common sense. Right.
Yeah. Well, and just also, I mean, our community is really passionate. I mean, your buddy is a hunter. I know is probably really passionate about hunting, and anglers are the same way. And, it's just that, we need to channel that passion into protecting the system that has worked really well for us and works well for the country.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen unless you engage.
No, I would totally agree. So before I let you go, I got to bring up a little topic here that I thought was pretty cool. It says here that you grew up hunting and fishing in upstate New York, and you were a member of Team USA in 1997 with the World Fly Fishing Championships. Tell me about that.
Well, it's been downhill since then. Certainly in terms of my fishing time, but no, that was a lot of fun. I mean, I grew up hunting and fishing. My dad was, our family had a wood lot out in the woods. We're 2 miles back on a dirt road. We had no neighbors. We had a trout stream. So my brother and I were fly fishing, mostly with worms at the end of that fly rod since we basically were walking. So
yeah,
it's been a passion for a long time. And in that particular championship in '97, that was the first and maybe only time that the World Championships has been held in the U.S. And Trout Unlimited at that time, where I was working, was basically the beneficiary of the profits from the event. So they wanted to have a TU member on Team USA, and I was that person. So I'd like to say I went through a grueling trials and,
find the right place at the right time.
But I was just the right place at the right time. But it was fun, and it was something I will enjoy and always remember.
Yeah, cherish that one. That's great. Oh, that's awesome. Well, keep doing what you guys are doing, and feel free. I'd love to maybe bring you back on, or bring someone else back on the show that's part of the TRCP. Talk a little bit about some of the new things that are going on that's important to people to know and learn about with the what you guys are proposing to support in the realm of the conservation. I'd love to do that. That'd be great.
Hey, listen, we're always here, and we got some pretty smart people on staff, a lot smarter than me. They can go far deeper into the issues than I can. So anytime, let me know what you want, and we'll make it happen. And I really appreciate you having me on, and also just highlighting these types of issues on your podcast.
No, this is great. I think we'll get some good publicity out of it. Feel free to share with your community, and we'll get the message out here probably early next week.
Fantastic.
All right. Thanks, Whit. Appreciate your time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Uh-huh.